Do you know why Stevens Point is nicknamed the gateway to the pineries? You will after this video. Hey, I'm Lee the Lumberjack, and I started working as a lumberjack in Stevens Point in 1881 when the John Week Lumber Company came to my town. Myself and 120 of my other best buds would work out in the sawmills, but we also had 150 men working out in the fields collecting that lumber for us. The John Week Lumber Company brought permanent growth and prosperity to my town in Stevens Point, and they helped make us the gateway to the pineries. Because my buddies out there working in the field, they had to help transport the logs from the northern cities in Wisconsin down to the southern cities in Wisconsin. And they did that by transporting it down the river. That's how we got the nickname, the gateway to the pineries. If you want to be a lumberjack like me, you're going to have to like the camp lifestyle. I like the camp lifestyle. I like hanging out with my best buds and getting a good hard day working. But I don't do this year round. I'm a farmer for the rest of the year, but during winter, I report to the lumber camps because I need extra money to give to my family and my loved ones. At the lumber camps, we were awoken at 4 a.m. by a loud horn. From there, we would go and put on our lumberjack outfits, which consisted of a flannel, some suspenders, our nice jeans, and some steel-toe boots, because you never know what you're going to step on out there in the field. And then, from there, we would head down to the breakfast area, where we would be eaten by 4:30.
The cook and the cookie made lunch, breakfast, and dinner for the 150 men who worked in the lumber camps. That guy right there, the one in the white coat, that's Tim. That's the cookie. John isn't featured in this picture, but he's out and back cooking because he is the cook. Tim and John would be cooking all day because they had to feed these 150 men for those 3 meals daily. Once we finished breakfast, we would then head out to the fields, and particularly the forest, which is where our fitters would start our tree cutting process. The fitter's job was to survey the land to decide which way they wanted the tree to fall, which would be the best and safest way to do it so that no one would be crushed by a tree. And so in this image you can see the fitters start to cut the tree down by cutting it at a nice angle. It's called a clear cut notch. And once they do that, then we have the fellers that come in. Now the fellers come to the tree. Their job is to finish cutting the tree down, which is why their name is the fellers, because they fell the trees. They grab their cross-cut saw like in the picture and they chop the rest of the tree down. But before they do that, they have to make an escape route, because once that huge tree starts to fall, they better know where they're going so that they don't get crushed by it. And once they've patted down their path, sometimes they actually have to pat down their path because there's snow on the ground because we're doing the logging in the winter. Once that is done, then they cut down the tree and they yell, "Timber!" They run for it, and everyone knows what timber means, so they also run for it. Now that the tree has fallen, it's time for the swampers to get to work. That guy right in the middle, he was a funny dude. His name was Jeremy. He was one of the swampers. He and the other 2 pals would cut the tree so that there was no branches on it, and usually they would even pull off the bark so that when they had to move the tree to the main road, it was a lot easier to drag without all of that nonsense. With the branches off, it was time for the buckers to come in and cut the logs so it was even easier to pull onto the main road, and they would cut those logs into 16 feet logs. And from the first picture of the tree, you can tell that the buckers had a lot of work to do because these trees were way longer than 16 feet. They would also use the crosscut saw, and they had to be very careful as to where their hands and feet were because they didn't want to cut anything off because there was no doctor out in the wilderness. Since they don't have doctors out in the forest, you wouldn't think they have dentists out there either. But we did. We had different dentists though. These dentists were the guys that would take care of our tools, like our saws. They would have to sharpen the teeth on the saws so that they were ready for us to work every morning. The dentists were always working because we were always using our saws. So they were always dull and they always needed to be sharpened. The dentist's job was never done. Remember how I had mentioned Tim and John earlier? Our cook and cookie? Yeah. Well, Tim was actually our cookie, and he had to run us lunch every afternoon because we were out there, we were deep in the wilderness, and he had to come and give it to us because we didn't want to stop work to walk all the way back to the kitchen. That would have delayed us a lot, and we had a lot of work to do every day. So Tim got his workout in trying to find us out in the wilderness, but when he did, we sat down and had lunch together out in the beautiful wilderness, which was a plus of being a lumberjack. Once we finished lunch, we would work until it got dark. In this picture, we are showing you the hide pounder. Can anyone guess what the hide pounder does since it has the name hide in it? Well, the hide pounder worked with the horses, and the horses would drag the logs from the wilderness out into the main road. The hide pounders had to care for the horses, and specifically they had to make sure that their horseshoes fit them properly. We had blacksmiths back at the camp, but the hide pounders had to make sure the horseshoes they made for their horses were perfect fit for the horses because they worked just as long hours as we did, and we didn't want them to be uncomfortable or get any injuries because they were necessary for our process of lumberjacking. The horses did all of the heavy lifting because none of us humans wanted to do it. Once they dragged the logs to the main road, then the skybirds would come in. The skybirds would take the logs off of the horse's sled and they would transfer it onto the oxen's sled. These were makeshift sleds. Some of them called them bobsleds, but they were more of makeshift sleds just because we didn't have all of the necessary stuff we needed to make it into a complete bobsled. And with that, our skybirds would sometimes double or triple check their work because no one wants a log to fall off the oxen's sled and crush them because, as you know, these are very big logs. And so the skybirds' job was very important, and they had to make sure their knots were very, very sturdy. Now that the oxen sleds have been filled, I think it's a perfect time to tell you what my favorite role is at the lumber camps. Although I worked at the sawmill and was not able to work out in the field as a lumberjack, if I could, I would want to be a bull whacker. Why? Because I want to hang out with the oxen all day long just like they did. And although the word whack is in their title, the bull whackers did not hit or harm their oxen. The oxen trusted their bull whackers because they cared for them. They made sure they were fed and groomed every single day. But if I could, I would want to be a bull whacker. That job sounds awesome. How is it possible that those oxen and horses were able to pull so much weight? Well, it's a little bit of a secret, but can I trust you? I thought I could. Well, the lumberjacks actually kind of made their own roads. They would always slicken them so that the horses and oxen could pull so much weight. It was the con man's job to sprinkle the roads with water. He also had to run down to the Wisconsin River every day to fill up his sprinkle wagon. And now that the con men had finished their job, it was time for the grovers to step in. The grovers would make nice tracks so that the sleds could be pulled through those tracks. Kind of like if you were to go cross-country skiing and you were the first one to lead the troops behind you, you would need to cut that trail, and that's exactly what the grovers did. Next, the road monkeys would come in. What a funny name, road monkeys. Well, the road monkeys had to make sure all of the fallen debris was out of the tracks that the Grovers made. The road monkeys would be out there working every day, just like the Grovers and conmen, to make these roads possible. And the road monkeys picked up a bunch of branches. They would have to shovel off fallen snow that would fall off the trees during the day so that the horses wouldn't have anything in their way when they were pulling, or the oxen for that matter. And honestly, these super slick roads with these strong animals pulling such large loads kind of sounds like a disaster to me. That's why they created the position hayman on the hill. The hayman on the hill would have to put down hay after there was like a big bump in the road, because if the horse is going at a very fast speed and it's very slick, then they're going to continue to slide and they're not going to be able to stop. And we don't want our horses getting run over by all those logs on their sled, and we don't want any human getting run over, which is why the hayman on the hill was a very important job, and he did it well. The haymen on the hill were watching out for the horses when they were grooving, but who's watching out for the horses when they're going to the bathroom? The answer to that question was the chickadee. At these moments, I was glad I wasn't working out in the field, because I would not want to be the chickadee. Man, he had a smelly job. Picking up all the horse poop and the oxen poop. Man, that must have sucked. But he was a very important dude, and so were the river pilots, also nicknamed the river pigs. But we're going to call them the river pilots. River pilots had the most dangerous job there was to have as a lumberjack. The river pilots had to steer the logs down the river. Their job was so important because the river never got tired, never needed food, and it never needed a rest. But the oxen and horses did. So a different transportation for the logs was the river. And the river pilots were the ones who commanded the logs down the river. They had to have a very good sense of balance, and they had to have the agility of a cat. Because as you can see in this picture, they had to balance on logs a lot. And sometimes the logs would pile up in a big bunch because, you know, if they're all going down the river at the same time, it's bound to happen. And the river pilots had to unclog whenever there were clogs. The river pilots also only got 2 meals a day because there was no chance that they could stop what they were doing in the middle of the day, because, as I said earlier, the river never rests. And so neither did the river pilots when they were on duty. They worked for 10 hours straight, which is longer than any other position. Does this sound like the position you want? Maybe you're super strong and agilic and you like skipping lunch. But if you don't, maybe you would have taken a different job or worked at the sawmill like me.
When the logs finally make it to the sawmill, that's when I come into play. My job at the sawmill is to take those 16-foot logs that the lumberjacks had put together and transported to the sawmill into usable lumber. Say you want to go to the hardware store and get some 2x4s to finish the project you're making. I had crafted those into those 2x4s. That's my job, and I think it's pretty darn cool.
It's time to talk about the Lumberjack Olympics. That's right, you heard it, the Lumberjack Olympics. I encourage you to try this at home with your family or friends. I've put together 2 events that you can try. This is a good way to figure out if you have what it takes to be a lumberjack. I think you might be surprised because I think a lot of you could do it.
Hello, thank you for joining us for the Lumberjack Olympics dressing style. So myself and my competitor, Nick here, are going to race and see who can get dressed like a lumberjack first. We're going to have to put on our boots, our pants, and our flannel. Are you ready, Nick?
Ready as I'll ever be.
On your mark, get set, go! Shoot, I should have untied these.
You still gotta get a shirt on though. You gotta button your pants. Ugh.
You're not even my clothes.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for the Lumberjack Olympics. Today's event will be the Hammerschlagen. First contestant is Nick. Hometown Brown Deer. His team is the Interpreters. Dean, representing the Flannels, is also from Brown Deer. And Beth is representing the Zumbas, is also from Brown Deer. How this is going to work is they're going to take turns with the hammer trying to pound in a nail. They're going to use the same hammer and the same stump. Go ahead and tap in your nails, contestants. Now, they are going to take turns swinging at their nail, and the winner will be the person who completely puts their nail into the stump first. We had a miss. A swing and a miss. Dean's getting close.
Oh, Nick hit the nail this time. There's progress.
Clear winner. Dean has sunk his nail.
Or Nick could tie it. Oh, he didn't.
Dean, how do you feel?
I feel wonderful.
Beth, how do you feel being one of the losing contestants?
I was two. I feel great.
Nick, how do you feel?
I'm sad.
What does our audience think? How do you think this round of the Lumberjack Olympics went, Summer? Well, you heard it here, folks. Thank you for joining us for the Lumberjack Olympics.
I recorded the Hammerschlagen Lumberjack Olympics at my home. Where is your home? Is it in Stevens Point? What is your favorite thing about Stevens Point? Leave your comment below. My favorite thing about Stevens Point is Schmeeckle Reserve. In this picture, you can see that Schmeeckle was clear cut back in the day. This is not an original photo of Schmeeckle because Schmeeckle wasn't anything special back in the 1800s, but we can assume that it was clear cut just like all of the other beautiful forests. After it was clear cut, they tried to use the land as farming, but with no success because Schmeeckle is a wetland, which is not a good area for farming. Now Schmeeckle is restored to its natural beauty and protected. If you have time, or if you don't, you should definitely make time to go and visit Schmeeckle and appreciate its beauty because it wasn't there in the 1800s, and now that it's protected, it will be there forever.
I'm happy to announce that Wisconsin is now an area that harvests their timber in a sustainable manner. We no longer clear cut our forests like we did in the 1800s, and that's because the foresters in Wisconsin now have the right tools and equipment they need to harvest in a sustainable manner. Because we don't want our trees disappearing and being clear cut like they were in the 1800s. Right? Yeah. And so, thank you so much for joining me on this adventure back to when I used to hang out with my old buds at the Lumberjack farms, and I'm sure they're glad that I was able to share my story with you. Definitely get out there and try the Lumberjack Olympics because they were so much fun. And with that, thank you and bye from Ralphie the Lumberjack.